So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the Castleton Republicans and Rutland County Republicans for inviting me. Thanks to all of you for being here and to the chefs for preparing such a wonderful breakfast for all of us. My husband Rick and I are very grateful to be here, very happy to be here, and I'm particularly grateful for this opportunity to speak with all of you today. So I'm going to talk to you today about the political and economic crisis that we on the right face in Vermont. And then I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I think that we need to answer in 2020 in order to take Vermont forward.
It's fine. Yeah, you're doing good. You're doing exactly.
So how many of you remember the gas rationing that took place in the 1970s? For those of you who don't know, a system of odd, even rationing was imposed on the American people, so that if the last digit of your license plate was odd, you could only get gas on odd number days. Okay. So Newt Gingrich tells a really interesting story about this time, about his friend Dennis, who at that time was about 13 years old. So every morning, Dennis's dad would give him a screwdriver and say, go outside and change the license plates of the cars so that the last digit matches the date. In case they needed gas, they could get it. So Newt Gingrich came up with a really interesting test based on this anecdote to tell whether you are a conservative or a leftist. So if you hear this story and you think, okay, all the policies that led to the shortage of gas and the rationing, they're all wrong. These are the policies that compel 13-year-olds to go out and change license plates every day. If you hear this story and think, okay, we need to get rid of all the policies that led to this crisis, then you are a conservative. But if you listen to this story and think, they should have had license plate cops at every gas station, then you are a leftist. Vermont right now, unfortunately, is being run with the latter attitude. Our economy is in free fall, but instead of changing the policies and laws that led to this crisis, that led to the driving out of industry, businesses, and people from Vermont in the first place, those in charge are putting the equivalent of license plate cops at every gas pump to punish those of us trying to survive in this climate of decline. What is the root of this governing attitude? It is the politics of envy. The politics of envy dominate Vermont. Trafficking in envy, manipulating the worst impulses of human nature, is the foundation of Bernie Sanders' political career. And now we have 2 Bernie bros running for governor and lieutenant governor. If you are driven by envy, then income redistribution, forced income redistribution, becomes the obsessive focus of your policies. But income inequality by itself is actually a misleading measure. My friend Stu told me the other day that they had income equality in their neighborhood growing up. Everybody was poor. If everybody's income is equal but it's low, is that a good thing? No. Former British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, came to power in 1979 when the UK was known as the sick man of Europe, because widespread nationalization of its industries and the embrace of socialism by both the left and right political parties had brought the once mighty nation to its knees. Mrs. Thatcher accurately articulated the goal of income redistribution when she said that those in charge would rather keep the poor poorer, provided that the rich were less rich. So instead of the gap being up here, they wanted it to be down here, where everyone is worse off. But she cautioned, you do not create wealth and opportunity that way. You do not create a property-owning democracy that way. The politics of envy pits the haves against the have-nots. We, on the right in Vermont, should challenge this with a new vision that empowers all Vermonters to be the haves. I don't want just one class of haves. I want our whole state of Vermont to be full of haves. is why the first sentence on our campaign website reads, "The moral path for Vermont is to become a pro-prosperity and pro-freedom state." A lot of people talk about the affordability crisis, but here's my question to all of you today. When did we become a people that stopped believing in the beauty of our dreams? When did we start striving to just survive instead of aiming to thrive, to prosper? Vermonters across all socioeconomic lines should be empowered with the freedom to build meaningful and prosperous lives. Every one of us should be able to create the lives that we feel is best for ourselves and our families. But to create prosperity, we need freedom. And all freedom begins with economic freedom. There can be no political freedom, healthcare freedom, or any other freedom without first economic freedom. But a large and centralized government that intrudes into every aspect of our lives, the kind that we have today in Vermont, and that will only get worse if David Zuckerman or Tim Ash win, is the opposite of economic freedom. Tim Ash said that for every law that they pass in Montpelier, there are some winners and some losers. The loser, however, is always the average Vermonter. Consider GE Aviation, right? A very important part of Rutland County's economy. So, as the largest user of energy in Rutland, GE has been telling the politicians in Montpelier for years that the ever-increasing costs of energy is making businesses unsustainable. But, quite frankly, expanding the economy, expanding economic freedoms, fostering a pro-business climate is not Montpelier's priority. Tomorrow, God forbid, if GE leaves, then who will be the loser? As I said when I began, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that we on the right need to answer definitively in 2020. My first question is, do you want real change in Vermont? I assume that each of us here would be inclined to say yes, right? But before you do, I'm going to ask you again. Do you want real change in Vermont?
Yes.
Real change is time-consuming. It is difficult. It is frustrating, and it is conflict-ridden. Not conflict for the sake of conflict, but conflict that arises when you have the courage of your convictions and the will and determination to act on them. Conflict has to and will certainly arise because all those who benefit from the current system, those on the left of course, but even those on the right, will feel very threatened and attack you. So, if you are not ready to deal with conflict, then I'm sorry, but you are not ready for real change. In our Republican politics, we hear a lot about compromise and consensus. Do we ever hear about conviction? Margaret Thatcher was known as the Iron Lady because of the strength of her character and the strength of her courage to fight for her beliefs. She called herself a conviction politician. Now, a conviction politician isn't someone who just screams his beliefs. A conviction politician shares his beliefs with the purpose of persuading people, not bullying them to fall into line. More importantly, a conviction politician backs his words with actions. In Montpelier today, the loudest voices, even from our party, pride their lack of conviction. They place great virtue in belonging to the center. But let's be real here. Being in the center means staying as inoffensive as possible to the far left. Being in the center means ultimately giving into the irrational demands of the far left and standing by as Vermont sinks. Mrs. Thatcher said this about consensus, and I quote, "Consensus is the process of abandoning all beliefs, principles, values, and policies in search of something in which no one believes, but to which no one objects. Consensus is the process of avoiding the very issues that need to be solved, merely because you cannot get agreement on the right way ahead." Closer to home, Barry Goldwater famously declared that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. Real change necessarily involves good faith debate and disagreements. It is a sign of intellectual vigor and a long-standing tradition within the Republican Party. Now, we all know that Vermont used to be a Republican stronghold, right? Vermont and Maine were the only two states that never voted for FDR. But even then, contrary to what Vermont Democrats claim today, Vermont was not under one-party rule. The Vermont Republican Party was deeply divided between the Proctor wing, based right here in Rutland, and the anti-Proctor wing, which after World War II came to be known as the Aiken-Gibson wing, after Senator Aiken and Governor Gibson, who were very liberal Republicans. The loudest voices in Montpelier today frequently refer to George Aiken and his liberal Republican wing as the ideal and only role model for Vermont Republicans. This is plain and simple rewriting of Vermont's history. After all, here we are in Rutland County, home of the Proctors who led the powerful conservative Proctor wing of the VT GOP. They were pro-business, pro-economic growth, and unabashedly conservative. Here's another point to keep in mind. Back then, it made more sense for candidates with leftist leanings to join the Vermont Republican Party, which was the dominant party in the state, and ascend the political ladder by raging against the Proctor conservative wing. In addition, Vermont Democrats often voted in the open primaries supporting the super liberal Republicans from the Aiken-Gibson wing in order to defeat the conservative Proctor candidates. What am I saying? The divide within our Vermont Republican Party is nothing new. That leftists have capitalized on this divide to their advantage is nothing new either. And this brings me to question number 2. Who are we fighting for? Are we fighting for the Republican Party apparatus? Are we fighting for a certain politician or groups of politicians? Or are we fighting for a new vision for the future of Vermont? The first option is about supporting anyone with an R next to his name as long as he wins elections. The second is about preserving the political career of one or more politicians. And these two options are ultimately about holding on to power at any cost. The third option, fighting for a new vision of Vermont, is about increasing productivity and helping create prosperity for Vermonters. And this is what I stand for. This has been the ethos of my political communications work, my health policy work with Vermonters for Healthcare Freedom, my media efforts with the YCN TV show, Dialogues with Meg Hansen, and now our campaign for Lieutenant Governor, the theme of which is Small Towns, Big Hearts. I've heard a lot from people about wanting to take Vermont back. And while I appreciate the sentiment behind that, I would encourage all of us to think about taking Vermont forward. I see 2020 as an election not between the left and the right, but as a choice between the past and the future. We can either choose to let the prison guards of the past accelerate the sorry state of affairs we are in now, or we can choose a brand new path forward. For those of us under the age of 40, there is no sustainable future in Vermont. I've had many, many conversations with Vermonters who want to own homes, want to own thriving businesses and farms, but cannot. I've heard from so many who want to be able to afford to have kids here, raise them here, build careers, save for retirement, and grow old here, but cannot. Kevin Dorn, who was very active in Vermont politics when Lieutenant Governor Brian Doobie was in office, told me that the most common question asked when he interacts with his friends and colleagues is, "Where are your kids?" It is widely accepted that no one's kids and grandkids live in Vermont. Vermont has seen a systematic hollowing out of the middle class and widespread deindustrialization. Springfield used to be known as the machine tool capital. Today it is the heroin capital of southern Vermont. In Rutland County, last year we saw 2 colleges shut down. The College of St. Joseph in Rutland and Green Mountain College in the historic slate mining town of Pulteney. The Wall Street Journal reports that New England will see 11% decline in high school graduates between now and 2032. Nationally, that number is at a 3.2% decline. So in this part of the nation, it's almost 4 times higher. Southern Vermont College in Bennington also shut down last year. So these 3 schools combined had about 1,000 students and hundreds of faculty and staff. And I take this very personally because education brought me to Vermont. Education brought my husband Rick to Vermont also a decade ago. We met here, we got married, and this is where our Hansen family story began. We all agree that Vermont cannot afford to keep losing young people, but those in power do not want to admit that their laws and policies are the cause of this mass exodus. Art Wolf is a former economics professor at UVM and a frequent commentator. He was forced recently to acknowledge that our loss of population is unusually high, but he gave ridiculous reasons to explain it away. People don't want to live in cold climates, he said. People don't want to live in small towns, he said. Yet North Dakota, Idaho, and Alaska are among the top 5 states that have seen the largest inflow of new residents. They all have cold climates, they're all full of small towns. So why are Americans moving there? Simple, they have a thriving economy. Others like to say that young people in Vermont, they want to leave because they want to go to new places and experience life. Okay, then why aren't young people from other states coming to Vermont to experience life here? Right? So now this brings me to my third question. What are we fighting for? We are being crippled by punishing tax burdens, vanishing economic freedoms for entrepreneurs and small business owners, no opportunities for upwardly mobile careers, the inability to make the best healthcare decisions for ourselves and our families, all because of what? Government monopolies, corruption, and a political class that prioritizes ideology over individuals. As I said earlier, there's a lot of talk about the affordability crisis, but no one speaks about the major accountability crisis that we face in Vermont. Lawmakers and administrators routinely waste our taxpayer monies, botch all kinds of state-run programs, and yet feel no need to answer to us. Did you hear about the women's prison scandal in Chittenden County?
Yeah.
Correctional officers were supplying some of the women prisoners who are addicts with drugs and forcing them to take part in sexual encounters. Okay, everyone right up to TJ Donovan knew about it, and yet nothing was done. Similar reports have come from Newport's women's prison. Okay, so for a state that positions itself as the pioneer of progressivism, how can such horrific incidents of sexual abuse be hushed up? Because no one is accountable, right? The billion-dollar scam that is OneCare Vermont, the deliberately complicated and opaque education spending system are 2 other scary examples of the accountability crisis in government that we are just expected to quietly accept. Either the government is the shepherd directing how the sheeple in Vermont live, or the government is our servant and is required to honestly answer to us, to we, the people. I am fighting to restore the latter in Vermont. But this is not about passing one legislation here or there. 2020 is about calling for a systemic change in the way Vermont government works. And for this to happen, we need a fundamental shift in the governing philosophy of our state toward prioritizing wealth creation and property ownership. Because wealth creation and property ownership are the 2 main aspirations of the middle class. And a strong middle class is essential for a healthy, representative democracy. The dreams and ambitions of the middle class for a better life should be encouraged, not restrained by a know-it-all state apparatus that tells American citizens what to do and when. This ambitious goal of real change, however, cannot be achieved by turning light blue or worse, purple. It comes from staying firmly red. Now, there isn't just one shade of red, there are many. Crimson, scarlet, cherry, ruby, burgundy, magenta, but they fall under the umbrella of red. Conviction politics requires persuading people that the vision of a pro-prosperity and pro-freedom future for Vermont is the best for all and therefore the moral path ahead. But that's a losing proposition, Meg, some will say. That's why you're not a viable candidate. You want to appeal to the center-left. Okay, in 1977, more than half of the American public, 51%, identified as Democrats. In comparison, a mere 21% called themselves Republicans, and yet Ronald Reagan won the presidency with a landslide victory barely 3 years later. How? Not by becoming Democrat light, or some neither here nor there mix of purple. He was a proud conservative who made the moral case for economic freedom, which appealed to independents and Democrats then, as I believe it does today. We cannot win if we are not ready to fight for real change. We cannot win if we do not know who we are fighting for or what we are fighting for. We cannot win if our only play is defense. And we cannot win if we are stuck in a minority attitude. Here's a radical thought on which I will end. We are not in the minority. How can we be in the minority when we are fighting to give everyone the ability to create greater prosperity and live freer lives? I encourage you all to go on the offense. Share your right-of-center philosophy and policy positions. Go on the offense by vigorously refusing the incorrect premise of the left. Because if we do not push forward, the left will push us back. This is why I see 2020 as a clear choice between the past and the future. A clear choice between those who have presided over the decline and fall of Vermont and those of us who stand for a brand new vision of a pro-prosperity and pro-freedom state to take Vermont forward. Thank you very much.
So that's about it. If I'm sure Meg would be happy to be around for a little while, but people want to talk with her a little bit.
I thought it was going to be question and answer session.
Would you like to do that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, then let's do it.
Okay. That's fine.
Meg, you're running for the office of Lieutenant Governor, and can you name 5 specific issues, detailed issues, that would be part of your campaign, or more importantly, when you were in office, 5 specific issues that you would press to reverse our current circumstances in the state?
Thank you, Brooke. As you know, the Lieutenant Governor doesn't make laws, but it is a very important position because you can advocate for things, you can present a different vision for the people of Vermont. As I said, it's not about one legislation here or one legislation there, but you can give an overarching new vision and start moving in that direction. So, as I said, pro-prosperity and pro-freedom. So the first thing would be economic freedom, healthcare freedom, and education freedom. So in economic freedom, I would start with tax reform. And specifically, well, I don't know, he wants all the details of the policies, but I guess I can just tell you to look at the Colorado and North Carolina model. It's called a tax trigger model with revenues. So as the revenues, so you kind of have the system where as the revenues go high, the tax goes down. It kind of triggers a decrease. So that way you're not just, saying, hey, listen, we're just going to cut taxes and then where's the revenue going to come from? That has actually worked in Colorado really well in the 1990s and most recently in North Carolina. And that is a wonderful example for us here in Vermont to follow. Of course, for that we need to have a majority in the House and the Senate. But that's one. The second thing I would say is the pension liability in terms of economic freedom. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it's in the red, right? Billions in the red. Who's going to cover that? Who's going to cover that? Me, my generation, millennials, and those who come after us. We're going to have to pick up the tab if the state goes bankrupt. And what about all the public state employees, the teachers? What happens when their pensions vanish? That's a huge problem, right? This is the accountability crisis I talked about. If you don't fulfill your debt obligations, then we're not going to be around to to carry the burden. Each person has to pay, what, 30 to 40,000? People will just leave. That's one. Number two, healthcare freedom. In healthcare freedom, we're going to first start with insurance, make insurance affordable again. There's so many ways to do that. And the Trump administration has actually passed many laws that help Americans access cheaper plans, but we in Vermont, we can't access it. We're cut from it because the state government has gone ahead and made barriers so we can't do that. Why? Again, as I said, they prioritize ideology. The ideology that created Vermont Health Connect, the insurance exchange under Obamacare, saving that is more important than allowing us to have access to cheaper health insurance plans. There are many ways to go around doing that, allowing association health plans, short-term, limited duration plans. These are plans the Trump administration allows all Americans to buy, but we in Vermont can't. And then One Care Vermont. I can go on and on about One Care Vermont, but I will spare you all. As the executive director of the Vermonters for Healthcare Freedom, I've been investigating One Care Vermont for a year and a half. It is, very simply put, a $1 billion scam. It's a scam that's enriching the leadership of the UVM, and the worst part about it is that it's led to rationing of health care. The number of, the usage of primary care physicians has gone down. The usage of specialty physicians has gone down. But we're not all healthier and happier. It's not. It's because they're doing data manipulation and preventing people from accessing services because they want to contain the costs. I don't want to go over anybody's head, but I'm just saying, if you want specific policy positions, I have a lot of them for that.
Okay. Since you're on healthcare, could you comment on the certificates of need issue?
Yeah, that's good. That's again another point about, so when you have a large STEM, there are two ways of looking at it, okay? They're just two simple ways. Either you have economic freedom, which best happens when you have a free market, or you have a planned society, as they used to call it, where you have a large centralized government full of bureaucrats and they tell you what to do when, what can be developed, and that increases the prices of everything from housing to opening a new surgical center. So the certificate of need is just part of that. And of course we have to repeal it.
You talk a lot about young people leaving the state of Vermont. And as I'm approaching the years of wanting to leave because of being a senior citizen, and how a lot of states don't tax Social Security anymore. We're talking of the government now wanting this carbon tax. Any thoughts on how to help seniors want to stay here, to afford to stay here?
So that's a really, really good question. When we talk about increasing $15 minimum wage, one of the key people, demographics are going to get hurt by that are people on fixed incomes, and that's the retired people. But I don't know, is it not organized? Is like the AARP is not organized? I mean,
The AARP is in the Liberal caucus. The AARP is yes, like they supported Obamacare.
Oh.
Huge.
Okay.
There is a senior organization, I can't remember the name of it. There you go.
So I mean, I think that again it would be, I mean, see, people will talk about affordability, we want to make it more affordable, but I would say, even if just because you're not working anymore doesn't mean that you don't want to have a prosperous and meaningful life. And there are many ways to do that, but you can only do that when you have freedom, right? And if the legislations that they're passing, forced paid family leave, $15 minimum wage, these are all just ways, if you actually just step back and look at it, these are ways to make sure that the middle class leaves. That's it.
Well, they talk about our Social Security as being an entitlement now, which is not. We already paid taxes on that, we're paying taxes again on it. You go to Tennessee or Florida, whatever, they don't tax you on Social Security. New Hampshire, so I mean, it's easier to move over the border then,
But then they want you to, right? That's the thing. I would keep saying, we don't have, people want jobs. Nobody wants basic jobs. You want to have an upwardly mobile career, right? Because you want to be able to create money, wealth, save up, buy a house, have kids. But what I realized is they don't want to have upwardly mobile careers because the middle class, most people in the middle, we are the most troublesome because we have aspirations, we have dreams, we want to do better, we want to buy a bigger house, we want our kids to go to a better school, and that's problematic. But when you have really wealthy people who feel guilty and for whatever reason want to pay whatever they want to and socially engineer a society, and then you have a dependent class that, you know, wants welfare, and that's just a bit, I mean, I'm not knocking on anybody, I'm just saying that when you have people who are under your thumb, it's easier to control, and that's better. It's a better society, that's what they want. Yes, too.
It would certainly be nice, I know, in Cavendish, I've watched a lot of friends and neighbors and family leave simply because of what you said about taxing Social Security and military pensions, and Vermont has no competitive advantage in that, and, you know, maybe someday if we get a majority in the House and the Senate, it would be nice if that stopped. I mean, you've already paid taxes on Social Security, you know, your 401ks, and unless you have a Roth IRAs. It should be a policy initiative of everyone running as a Republican or an independent conservative to, you know, put this forward. I mean, you got to get people. You're going to make up the money, you know, on the other end of it, as far as, you know, your sales tax and your revenue. But give people a reason to stay here. And that's what I've seen. I mean, I ran for the legislature twice, and I couldn't seem to convince people of that. And much to my chagrin, I'm around in my community all the time, and I've talked to some of my liberal neighbors, and they vote Democrat. They always have the Democrat signs, and they say, "Why are you moving? Well, I can't afford the taxes here." Are you kidding me? Really? And I just, you know, that's why they make blood pressure medicine. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. You want to speak into, you mentioned, excuse me, educational freedom. We're dictated by Montpelier on all education aspects, it seems like, in our local communities and stuff. They don't think we're smart enough to run our own schools, so they gotta tell us how to do all this stuff. What's your thoughts?
That's what I would say. We have a very long-standing tradition, 150-year tradition, right, of tuition. But the teachers' union is very powerful, very powerful. So I can say school choice all I want. Are they going to let us do it?
No.
Well, recently they had, the Supreme Court took up Act 46 in Montpelier.
Superior Court?
Well, this is how, it's one example of how there are special interests, and people say special interests a lot, but there are really special interests that have rigged the system in a way that helps them. And so other people can't make it, you know, newcomers, young people can't make it, can't afford to buy a house, can't do it. People on fixed income can't do it either. I mean, I don't know what to say. We can have, I wish we could have right to work laws. I wish we could do some kind of, you know, labor union reforms, because the people within the labor union aren't bad, right? It's just the way who's managing it and holding on to power and dictating this and that. And plus then they pay the dues and they support it, you know, give it to the Democratic candidates. So it's, how do we get out of that cycle? I can just say school choice. I can call for accountability with Act 46, because right now we have the local authorities pointing fingers here and the state pointing finger here. It's like that. So no one is accountable for how school budgets are created and how the education dollars are spent. I can just keep saying, well, that's an accountability crisis and we need to fix that and we need school choice. But
regarding education, thank you for bringing that up. School choice is actually not going to help to the extent that everybody keeps, oh, school choice, and they can decide. No, it's not, because the state of Vermont has allowed the Secretary of Education, who I guess is gone now, but she single-handedly instilled the proficiency-based learning curriculum that these kids are now being forced to go through. And my daughter's 14. She was in 4th grade when PBL came about. And I really gotta tell you that it has dumbed these kids down incredibly, because it does not give them any incentive to do better. Because, well, if I don't do well on this test, when they're taking a test, they're taking a test on a computer. If they get a question wrong, they're given another question that is easier until they can get it right. There is no incentive for them, there is no failing. So there is no incentive for them to do better. And that is where you have to, that has to be focused on too. You need to get rid of this. You need to make kids want to do better. But we don't want them to feel bad. Well, you know what? Maybe if they feel bad, they'll do better because they'll try harder. I see no incentive in my kid. And God bless her, she's one of the brighter ones. There is no incentive for her to do better. They say, well, it's on a 1, 2, 3, 4 based grading system now. And 3 is meets expectations. 4 is exceeds expectations, 2 is almost there, and 1 is you need a lot of help. But there's no, in order for them to get a 4, they must do extra work instead of knowing the thank you, subject better. They have to do more work. And my daughter just says to me, I'm not going to do it. Why do I have to work harder to get a 4 when there's, I mean, it's not going to mean anything. It doesn't mean that I'm smarter, it just means that I've done more work.
What do you all think about a tax credit for homeschooling? That's a solution. Hi, Dad.
When I was in the legislature, one of the toughest things I had to deal with as a Republican was not necessarily Democrats, it was the news media. They control the narrative. They will slander you if you dare touch the third rail, which I did a few times. They'll put your name in the paper nationally, which happened to me more than once. And let me give you an example. Kyle McDermott, one time when we had the election for Trump and Trump won, we were in the legislature at the time, and they set the TV up in the channel in room 15, the larger room for communication, and it went down. The channel 3 went down, and we couldn't see the inauguration. So Kyle McDermott walks in the room after they got it back up and running. They called tech support. 10 minutes after they got it running, of course, everyone had to go back to committee. He goes around counting. Yep, there's 10 people in the room. No one cared about the inauguration of Trump, including Republicans. So he reported that in the newspaper, and a week later, I challenged him on it. He goes, oh, I call him as I see him. No one really cared about Trump, and that's it. He's now reporting national news for Channel 3, not just state news. But this is the type of thing that happens to us as Republicans all the time. Do you have a way of getting your message out, or advice to other Republicans on how we get our message out?
The first thing to understand and accept is that it's not news media. They're not, that's a propaganda media, first of all.
It is.
They're not neutral referees, okay? That they're the attack line of the Democrats.
So do you talk to them or not talk to them? That's probably...
You talk to them with irreverence.
McSally.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can verify every word he said about media. When I was a candidate, my opponent knew exactly what I was doing, even before I did, practically. The media gave him a heads up on everything.
Okay, so there's social media, but again, Twitter and the suppress, they do a lot of things. So we are at a disadvantage because we're trying to get our message out, right? But if you understand the obstacles and you understand that you really have to work harder and tell all your friends to send this message across and do it across, you just have to work that much harder to get it across. You can. I mean, it's hard. I can give you so many examples. I've not even been in the race much, a few weeks. But when Bob Kinzel from BPR. He's pretty fair, right, compared to Jane Lindholm. I mean, I thought he was much better. He did an article when Tim Ash decided that he's running the lieutenant governor's race. He just described all the people on the left with no mention of anybody on the right. And actually, Rob Roper, the president of the Ethan Allen Institute, he gave me really good advice. He said, make sure that they don't make the Democratic primary the general.
It's true, it's true.
And that's what they're doing. They're doing that. So every time they don't mention my name, people call, hey, there's a Republican candidate. The winner of that, whoever emerges as the winner of the Democratic primary is not the next lieutenant governor. It's a fight, Doug.
It is, absolutely.
There's a couple hot button social issues that are going to affect our families very, very significantly in the next few years. They're affecting them now. One is the effort to codify abortion in our Constitution, and the other is the full legalization and commercialization of marijuana, which is in the pipeline here. Where do you stand on those issues?
I don't support I'm against marijuana completely. I don't understand how you can legalize that when we have an opioid epidemic. I don't understand that at all. And I don't understand how the legislature wants to increase the age of smoking to 21. Yeah, but then you want to legalize marijuana. The hypocrisy is really, I can't. Hi, Zach.
Well, that brings up a great point, and we've talked about this many times, vaping. I'd like to get this rumor clarified once and forever. Vaping is actually better than smoking cigarettes, believe it or not. One of the things that we've talked about plenty of times is that the state of Vermont is attempting to ban or legalize vaping or e-cigarettes. Are you still prepared to take on that fight, that challenge, and fight for people's rights to they want to? Because as a vapor myself, it has in fact reduced the urge to smoke cigarettes substantially. I can breathe much better. I can climb a stairwell without huffing and puffing and feeling like the lungs are under a blowtorch, if you want to portray it that way. Are you still prepared to take on that,
No,
on
definitely.
that fight?
So then this brings me back to what Doug said about misinformation. I don't know how many of you know, but there was this mysterious disease caused by vaping, and it was affecting all the teens, right? But what the real cause of it was THC. THC in the e-cigarette is mixed with all kinds of additives like vitamin E, oils. So basically the x-rays had oil drops in the lungs, and that's what was making the teens sick. So there's a lot of, I don't think addiction to nicotine helps, but it's very hard for chronic smokers to quit. And from the studies that have been done that were not politicized in Britain, so the BM, British Medical Journal, and the Lancet have published really good studies explaining that vaping, where you're exhaling water vapor, helps in harm reduction. It helps people to get off cigarettes. It helps adults who are addicted to tobacco cigarettes to get off it. So in that sense, it is good. But there's the media is talking about how it's a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug to, I don't know, heroin, but marijuana is not.
Yeah.
I noticed that you didn't answer the question in regard to abortion.
Pro-life. Pro-life, but I didn't mean to not answer it, but yes, I am. I do support exceptions, though. I'm not saying that, I know that some people who are pro-life would not like that and think that I'm pro-choice in that, but in situations where the woman is raped, incest, and I think those are very difficult questions. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just acknowledging that it's very, very difficult. That said, actually, it's very important. I think that the debate has changed, though, from what it was historically about pro-life versus pro-choice, because now the left is talking about abortion right up to the expected day of delivery. That's what the bill is here. That's what they want to codify in our. That's different. You know what? I mean, 85% of Americans who are not really invested in this issue think that third trimester abortion is weird. It's crazy and it should not be done. And third trimesters last 3 months. So everybody's seen a pregnant woman, right? So on the day of delivery, yeah, but I mean, really? I don't think that, it's so outside the mainstream. I think it's not just Pearl, it's so outside the mainstream, such an extremist point of view that we should really push back on that. I'm completely against this, what is it, age 57? And it's Prop 5, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in. Myself and Jimmy McNeil are the only two senators that voted against the Proposition 5, which was the amendment to the Constitution. 857 was the bill that was passed last year, and I know there's other Republican representatives that voted against it, but unfortunately it was signed into law, so we have to live with that. But I just want to make that point.
Yeah, and additionally on H57, when it was on the House floor, we debated that for 11 hours.
Yeah.
We had 13 amendments to that bill, and not one passed. So that's what we're up against. We will get up there and we will debate. And it was a civil debate. I mean, we really, it was civil and respectful, but, you know, we're doing all we can do with 13 amendments going through to try to make the bad bill a little bit better. And, you know, it was a hard fought, and we still lost.
No, I appreciate what you do.
What happened with all the other Rs? Are they just hoping that it'll go to the people and it'll be voted down? I mean,
No.
Well, the House hasn't had a chance to vote.
no, I'm talking about the Senate. There's more than 2 Rs in the Senate.
Yeah.
So what happened to the rest of them?
I can only answer for myself. There's 6 Republicans.
But you guys caucus.
Yeah.
So
I guess you'd have to ask them their reasons. Jimmy and I were very strong.
S55, where do you stand on that? Can we repeal it, or is it still locked in place?
Bob can speak to.
That's all the waters under control are two government. I think that it should be repealed, just because the entire concept of what they did, ramming it down our throat, just like the H57, everything they did violates some constitutional right. From the get-go, they knew it. They knew they had the majority. It's just, has anybody sat in on the House Judiciary Committee? It's an experience you'll never forget. It is so one-sided that the chair of the committee, when our side starts to testify against a particular bill, she will pack her stuff up and walk out the door. She does not care. When she passed through her committee the domestic violence, the H422 last session, she took a straw poll real quick. If we had a vote right now, how would it go? You know, vote, 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 vote. She went down to all 11. It was 7-4. She took the vote. She said, we're never going to decide whether this is constitutional or not, so let's just pass it out of committee. Took the vote, boom, done, passed, over, less than a minute. That's what we're up against.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.